Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today we're going to be breaking down the finals match of the Black Horns Cup 2024 between Ville Valimaki and Zenic Brydl. Hopefully I pronounced your names right. And in this particular fight we had a lot of really exciting exchanges, though I will probably go back and do some other fights from this tournament because there were a lot of interesting ones. So with that said, let's get started. For our first exchange, we see Zenic and Ville kind of feeling out each other's range, moving a little bit back and forth, at which point Zenic throws out a one-handed cut, what looks like towards the hands or maybe the knee, though it turned out to be a feint. A feinted one-handed attack is sometimes a good way, but also a very risky way of trying to bait out an attack from your opponent. In this particular case, it works out great because Zenic recovers from his one-handed cut very quickly, transitions into an ox guard, a high angled forward guard, at which point Ville comes in with his counterattack and lands directly into the cross of that ox. At which point Zenic throws a very nice vertical low and to the left side, which Ville is unable to counter, and the exchange goes to him. For our second exchange, we see a little bit more feeling out. This time it looks like Ville is a lot more wary of the potential of one-handed attacks. And that turns out to work out very well for him because Zenic throws another low cut towards the legs, potentially as bait. Ville does once again come forward for the counterattack, but he does a very critically important move here, which is that he delays his counterattack. And this is something critical for a lot of people to understand because when you know that your opponent is trying to bait something out, it can often be too good to be true. And sometimes after you see somebody miss, coming forward and just sort of holding your blade in the air in front of yourself is a great way to make sure that whatever guard your opponent transitions to, waiting for that counterattack, you can easily subvert by simply angling it, feinting it into another opening, exactly as Ville does here. Despite the fact that it looked like pretty clean attack from Ville, though, the judges do not seem to have awarded him any points for this. Perhaps they thought that the afterblow got through or was in tempo. I'm not 100% sure. But all the same, a really great strategy that looked like, at the very least, it almost pulled off. Our next exchange is a bit of a simple one, though it goes to show just how threatening one-handed cuts can be, even when your opponent is in a right foot forward stance. Zenic, as you can tell from the footage, leans forward pretty far and releases the sword with his right hand so that he can extend his left hand even further and tap Ville on the leg. Unfortunately, Ville, who up until now has been pretty vigilant about one-handed strikes, doesn't seem to capitalize quite appropriately and is unable to move forward and counterattack in time with Zenic's leg shot, which means another clean point for Zenic. So the score is now 3-0 for Zenic, and it really seems like Ville is starting to feel the pressure as he needs to find a way to adapt his way out of this tight little loop Zenic has him in. And he tries to get out of it by going back to something that more or less worked for him a few exchanges ago. He's going to attempt to delay his counterattack. So we see again in this exchange, Zenic is probing with the threat of his one-handed cuts. Ville parries one of these one-handed, although I think it was mostly two-handed cut to the hand, and comes forward with a counterattack. However, he delays that counterattack, hoping that Zenic will go right back into his favorite guard, that high ox guard, and that he can come back around and hit Zenic in the arms. However, Zenic has once again adapted to Ville's adaptation, and instead of going into his high guard, he continues to back up out of range, and the second he sees that Ville is delaying a little bit too long, simply snipes him in the hands from that position and continues to go out of range. Ville, of course, after being sniped in the hands and given the position he was in when he was trying to delay his counterattack, is unable to close the distance again and finds himself at the end of another clean point. The next exchange is another clear one and another clear example of how you can keep your opponent at the end of a really tough loop of fencing if you are willing to throw something almost completely random out there every once in a while. Zenic up until now has been doing a great job of keeping Ville at distance and sniping at his limbs with one-handed cuts while waiting for the counterattack and capitalizing off of that. Instead, however, for this exchange, Zenic full sends a ballistic thrust directly towards Ville's head, and to Ville's credit, he does come within just about an inch of parrying that off to the side and getting the win. However, Zenic does land the thrust, and as a result comes away with another clean exchange, though it's worth pointing out yet again that the reason he threw this wasn't necessarily because he needed this point desperately, but because he needed to make sure that Ville didn't have any more information to adjust to while he's still trying to get out of the loop that he has been engaging previously. The next exchange is definitely an exciting one, as we see Ville seem to finally find his way out of the woods on Zenic's tough little loop. And what we see is that Zenic throws another bait cut, something that really had no intention of landing, that hits directly into Ville's crossguard, at which point Ville throws a counterattack. And up until now, this is what Zenic had been looking for. He goes up into his same guard, he parries the counterattack, and he immediately goes into a nice left zverk. However, this time, Ville knows what's going to happen, and he is ready for it. He does a very nice and very clean and very fast parry on his right side, which, as I said earlier, is very difficult for right-handed fencers to do, and goes into a secondary counterattack, which lands clean. This seems to be, although a little flat, a really, really nice adaptation from the part of Ville, who has learned now that if he engages Zenic in the pocket, he has the skills and he has the speed to take care of those counterattacks, which means that he can continue in the pocket and get those long 3-4 exchange decisions, which right now are looking like they're going to go in his favor. While it's bad luck for Ville again, because this is another exchange where it looks like he didn't get any credit for points, in our next exchange we see the exact same scenario played out, which is why I pointed out in the previous exchange, because it's worth noting that, once again, Ville has let Zenic engage with a light probing cut to his hands, he parries it, he throws a counterattack, he waits for Zenic to parry and then throw his own counterattack, at which point he stays in the pocket and he continues the exchange. Now, in this case, the exchange was a little bit less clear and a little bit more muddled, but what you can clearly see is that Ville is getting very, very good at parrying Zenic's counterattacks and throwing counterattacks of his own that are not able to be parried by Zenic. For the next exchange, things are really starting to turn around for Ville, as he has finally managed to parry a one-handed strike and find himself in a position where the ox guard that Zenic has normally been taking does not protect him. He parries a one-handed thrust off to his left side, which means that Zenic has a lot further to travel in order to recover, and he is unable to assume his right ox, right hanging kind of guard thing before he is able to simply hit him in the head. Another, though, thing to point out is that Ville is throwing a lot of flat-looking counterattacks, which may or may not be getting called right now as flat or thrown out, but I guess it's just worth noting that there really isn't any particular reason why they should be flat other than convenience. In the next exchange, we see that Ville is once again going really hard in the adaptations for the things that Zenic had been throwing in the beginning, to the point where he does what another thing I would say is very difficult for most fencers to do: parry a one-handed cut to your own leg. Zenic throws that one-handed cut to the leg, as he had been successful on before, and Ville simply points his sword down and manages to parry it in a kind of C-parry fashion. I would definitely advise against this for most people, as it's definitely very difficult to do quickly, but he manages to pull it off, at which point he continues forward and gets into the pocket very nicely. However, he makes another critical mistake, which is that he starts trying to delay his counterattack again, which we already know that Zenic has found a way to adapt against. And Zenic does exactly that. As Ville comes forward with his delayed counterattack, he manages to throw an upward cut towards Ville's hands, which at first doesn't seem to be called by the judges, but given that Ville's own counterattack is yet again parried and they go into a kind of grapple, I think that was where the judges were willing to give it the clean hit. So that was the final exchange, and although it seemed like a very one-sided fight, I would like to point out that if Ville had gotten the 2 points that I at least think he deserved earlier on, it would have ended at 7-5 rather than 7-3. And despite the fact, again, that the score doesn't necessarily reflect it, it was a really close match with a lot of really great adaptations. But if you want to see more fighting from this tournament, or you want to see me review other fights, feel free to send me some footage, or like and comment down below. Thanks, and have a good one.